To accept or not to accept, that is what I want to talk to you about this morning. It's a powerful, powerful teaching, and I want to share a letter with you that I got from somebody that's watching us, and the letter says, "My wife and I live in Colorado and have been enjoying your Sunday talks online. Your talks, Stop Tapping the Brakes, caused me to think about how to identify those situations in life where, through self-examination, one can move beyond false limitations and other situations that are impossible to change. In a future talk, could you please contrast the guidance you provide in this talk with the focus on acceptance found in several Eastern spiritual paths? Considering your remarks, is there a role for the part of serenity prayer that asks to be given the ability to accept the things that can't be changed? It seems to me that your talk dealt with removing self-imposed limitations, but not much about identifying whether limitations can be removed. Or according to unity philosophy, are there any limitations that cannot be removed through appropriate thought given to the inherent divinity of each person? Thanks, Calvin." First of all, thank you, Calvin. I appreciate the question and the thought. And it just happens to be that this month we're studying acceptance at Unity. So talk about divine timing, right? So I want to share with you, my wife and I were going out to Saugatuck the other day to spend some time on the boat. And as we're driving out to Saugatuck, all of a sudden there's a detour. And the detour takes us way out of the way and then brings us back onto the highway. And when we saw the detour, I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, no big deal. No big deal. It's just a detour. You just go through it, right? And so we took the detour. It took us a little bit out of the way, and then we got back on the road and everything was fine. Now, in and of itself, no big deal, right? No big deal. But what you don't understand, the rest of the story is that 3 weeks ago when I hit the detour, not the same scenario at all. That scenario sounded something like this. I see the detour, and I start doing what? Wah, 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 wah. And I start going, can you believe this? We're going to wind up being late. We're not going to be able to get on the boat. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. Yanta, 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 yanta. Anybody ever been there when something shows up like that in our life? Yeah, right? And so the difference was really, really simple for me. The understanding, or the lesson for me, if you will, is that in one scenario, I'm over here, and I'm not doing a very good job of accepting what is. And then over here, I did accept what is. And how was the experience different? How was my experience different in the moment? Over here, I'm frustrated, I'm upset, I'm mad. Yeah? And over here, I'm not at all. I think there's something to be learned from that when it comes to acceptance, because we all go through it. Things are going on in our lives that in some cases aren't a lot of fun. I get it. And yet, sometimes it's something as little as a detour that can completely derail us, right? Completely. So I looked up acceptance online, and I thought this was probably my favorite definition. Acceptance in human psychology is a person's assent to the reality of a situation, recognize a process or condition without attempting to change it or to protest it. I'm not going to change this situation, and I'm not going to protest it. That's acceptance. That's acceptance. So as I was thinking about that, of course, what comes to mind? The serenity prayer. Like was mentioned, that Calvin mentioned. What about the serenity prayer in the 12-step program? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We've heard that many, many, many times, right? And it really is a beautiful prayer, right? Let me try and process this in such a way where, look, if I can roll up my sleeves and really get after something and change it, let me change it. Don't let me hide. Don't let me play small. Let me stand into my power and my strength and do something about it. But if it's something I really, really can't change, let me know that I can't change this, and let me accept this. Accept the things I cannot change. And as I started thinking about that, the next thing I thought about was, what are some other tremendous examples of this idea of accepting? What are some of the great stories in history? And of course, what comes to my mind is Jesus and the stories of what he went through. And what I thought about is, I could not think of a better story, a better example of this than when Jesus is getting ready to die and be nailed on the cross. Because what we know is he knew what was coming. Do you know there's 4 times in the Bible where he predicted it and he said, hey, by the way, guys, this is going on. This is going to happen. He knew it. In Matthew 16:21 through 28, from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed. And the 3rd day will be raised. So he's already telling people this is what's going to happen. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But he turned to Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. Woo, not expecting that one. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. So let's look at this metaphysically, shall we? Because there's tremendous wisdom in the story when we look at it metaphysically. What does Jesus equal? What does Jesus represent metaphysically? Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness, you're hanging out and you're connected with this thing, and there you are, pure, absolute being connected to your divinity, Christ consciousness, which we all have access to, and don't make it a big deal. In other words, don't look at it and go, oh, I could never do that. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So Jesus equals Christ consciousness. Jerusalem, peace. So what's happening? Christ consciousness is saying, hey, I got to go check out this thing that's called peace. I'm really, really happy there. But in the meantime, I got to go through some pretty crazy things. But don't worry about it. That's really what Christ consciousness will allow you to experience. Would we not all agree that going through and being condemned and then getting nailed on a cross and dying wouldn't be pretty extreme? Probably. Probably, right? He knew he was going to die. Jesus knew he was going to die. So Christ consciousness says, hey, I got to go through some things to get to peace, but in the meantime, things are going to get crazy. Don't worry about it. Right? What does Peter represent? Now remember, metaphysically, Peter normally, and this was what makes this story so fun, he normally represents faith. That's what makes it so ironic. Not in this moment. Not at all. What does Jesus say? Jesus goes, Satan, calls him Satan. Holy cow. That's pretty extreme, isn't it? It's like, whoa, Satan. What's Satan? Metaphysically, sense consciousness. All thoughts in one that fights against and are adverse to the truth. So they're all thoughts that are against the truth of what's going on. So again, Christ consciousness is showing up over here saying, hey, I got to go through this to get to peace. Don't worry about it. And all of a sudden, Peter shows up and he starts doing what? Whoa, 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 whoa. Slow your roll. That ain't going to happen. We're not going to let that happen. And Jesus says, oh, yes, we are. And so what's happening here? Here's what's happening. And then, so Peter represents sense consciousness. So what happens when these things show up in our lives, right? When the things show up that we're just like afraid of or we're scared of, is that what happens is you get this thing that's coming together. Just realize what's happening here. Christ consciousness, sense consciousness, and there all of a sudden there's going to be a battle. Ever have that happen in your life? We all do. We all do, right? So let's look at that for just a second. Sense consciousness. In sense consciousness, where is Peter going from a mindset standpoint? What is going on when we're using sense consciousness? I thought of a couple of things. Fear. Fear. Things are going to change. This is going to be scary. I don't like this. I'm not so sure about what's going to happen, but I really don't like this. Fear sets in when we're using sense consciousness. Denial. This isn't going to happen. Hey, God, hey, Jesus, we're not going to let this happen to you. So what's happening, think about it from a sense consciousness standpoint. What's happening is all of a sudden what is showing up? Resistance. Resistance. What does resistance look like? Fighting. We're going to fight this thing. We're not going to let this happen. That's sense consciousness. That's one way you can handle it. That's one way you can process it. Or there might be a different way to handle it. Christ consciousness. What's Christ consciousness? There's no fear. In the story, I don't see anywhere where Jesus is freaking out, going, oh my God, yeah, you're right, Peter. We're not going to let this happen. He's not. Why is he not? Why is he not in fear? Because he knows, I really believe this. I really think that Jesus could see, like, the big picture, what was really going on. I really believe that Jesus knew in order for him to go through this, to fulfill his destiny, he knew it. And so he was willing to accept the bumpy road part, the part to see so he could fulfill it. But there was no fear. He was walking around telling everybody, hey, folks, the gig's up. It's time for me to go through this. There was no fear. Was he denying what was going to happen? No. He told everybody what was going to happen. They may have been in denial, but Jesus was not in denial in any way, shape, or form. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and he told us what was going to happen. Was there any resistance? None. None. When we're in Christ consciousness, when we're connected to our divinity, we're able to show up like this. We're able to show up without fear, without denying what's going on, without resistance. That's what happens. That's what we have access to. That's what we have inside of us when we actually start to play with this stuff called our divinity. That was the message Jesus was trying to teach everybody. And there were other masters that did the same thing. That you have this peace inside of you that will provide no fear, no denial, no resistance. Right? So again, it's in that moment where we've got this choice. Christ consciousness, I can use this, or sense consciousness. And guess what? You get to decide. You get to decide. Unity believes that you have a choice. Jesus knew he had a choice. He knew it. And guess what he chose, obviously, in that moment, was to embrace Christ consciousness and step forward into a pretty difficult time, I would say, knowing that that's what was going on, knowing he was going to be facing his death and he was going to go through everything that he went through, right? Eric Butterworth knew this and does a great job explaining this in Discover the Power Within. Remember that Jesus has made the great discovery of the divinity of man. He's trying to help us realize that there is always a depth potential of strength within us, even in times of weakness. He's telling us that when we find ourselves upset over something another person has said or done or a circumstance, our upset indicates that we have been in the wrong state of consciousness, the wrong state, sense consciousness, right? To reach to it is the same state of mind, only compounds the problem within us. Jesus says, turn to the other side of your nature. You are both human and divine. There is that in you that can never be hurt, that is always poised and peaceful, that knows your spiritual unity with God and knows that no one can take your good from you. In this divine state of consciousness, the hurt is healed, the influence of the other person or circumstance is nullified, and you become a healing influence. You become a healing influence. And that's really the potential that we all have. That we can stand in a moment, whether it's something that's going on in our own lives, or maybe we have a loved one that's going through a difficult situation, a difficult time. And what if you could just stand in that moment and be present for them? And just process with them. And just love them unconditionally. And support them, even if they're in the process of transitioning. Even if that's the case. What if we could be there and show up and just be present for them? Would that not be a pretty amazing gift to give to somebody? Pretty profound, pretty incredible that we have the ability to be able to do that, right? True acceptance allows us to move forward versus staying emotionally or physically stuck, even when we don't see or understand the bigger picture. What happens when we don't accept something is we resist it. When we resist it, we stop. We are literally stopped dead in our tracks from moving forward in any way, shape, or form. Certainly emotionally, and often I would say physically, we are just stopped. And when we learn to accept, what happens is we're able to move forward. And we're actually able to process whatever it is that we need to process that will allow us to move forward. Often, my experience has been that's emotional work that needs to be done in order for us to move forward in it. Right? So, how can you tell if you're truly accepting something or not? In my experience has been, as I'm paying more and more attention to this, often I'm not, I'm just being honest, right? I'm doing better to pay attention to it now that I'm talking about it, and now that I actually went and studied the Bible and found some pretty cool metaphysical interpretations, and I realized that the plan or the way that you do that actually has been outlined for us, but I didn't really pay attention to it before. So how fun is that? It's one of the gifts that I get when I get to do this stuff. So how can you tell? Well, look at no fear, no denial, and no resistance. So when you're dealing with something, just ask yourself those questions. Is there fear? Is there denial? Is there resistance? If there is, you're probably not accepting something, fully accepting it. Probably not. And again, when we talk about no fear, if there's no fear, what's going to be? What's it going to feel like? Peace. Metaphysical interpretation of Jerusalem is peace. How do we know if we're accepting something? There's peace. It is what it is. You're peaceful. That's how you can tell if you're accepting something. There's no denial. You're not denying the reality of what's happening. Denial is the action of declaring something to be untrue when in fact it is. Right? We're not talking about spiritual bypassing here. We're not talking about denying the reality of what is really going on. We're accepting it. So there is no denial. We're accepting what is and moving forward. Is there resistance? Well, ask yourself this question. Are you doing it without attempting to change what's going on or protesting it? I think those are pretty powerful questions. Right? Are you? So when I go back to the original question that Calvin asked in reference, I would say the original question, can I change this or not, isn't exactly the way that I look at situations that are going on in my life. That's not where I start. Where I start is, am I accepting this or not? Am I accepting what is going on right here, right now? Am I accepting it? That's where I start. No matter what shows up in my life, am I accepting this reality of what is going on right here and right now? I love this quote from Eckhart Tolle. Accept, then act. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. Whew, that's a lot of responsibility. A lot. Always work with it, not against it. This will miraculously transform your whole life. Why? There's no resistance. There's no denial. There's no fear. Imagine stepping into every moment of your life with that state of consciousness. No fear, no denial, no resistance. Do you think that would be a pretty powerful way to live your life? Yeah, pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. Pretty amazing. And we all have the ability to be able to do that, all of us. Does that mean that it's going to happen like that? Snap your fingers and it's going to be all great, Mike. Is that what you're saying? No. Not at all. Not at all. I would say that acceptance is a process that we all go through. And I would say that things in life that show up in some cases are pretty easy to accept. There's a detour, Mike. Go around it. Is a little bit different than I get news that somebody I love has got cancer. A little bit of a difference. A little bit of a difference, right? So to me, acceptance is a process, and I give myself permission to have my process with it. I don't deny what is going on. I don't deny that I've got a loved one that may be going through something where it's pretty scary. It's scary for them, it's scary for me, it's scary for everybody involved. But I accept and realize that it's a process. And I don't deny the process. I don't. If I feel like crying, I'm going to cry. If I feel like getting upset, I'm going to give myself the permission to get upset. So we're not denying anything that's going on in your human experience. That's called spiritual bypassing. We don't do that here. We don't. We allow ourselves to have the experience, whatever it is. Whatever it looks like, whatever it feels like, whatever it sounds like, we honor it. Why? Because we all have our own way of processing this stuff. Look, I wish I could stand up here and tell you that everything that shows up in my life, I sit there in Christ consciousness and just roll right through it. I'd be lying. But I'm getting better. When I study stuff like this, when I study the metaphysics, when I look at different things, when I study different teachers, when I see different people in my life and the way that they handle stuff, what I'm noticing is I'm growing. I'm maturing spiritually, and I understand this. And so now sometimes I am able to process it a little bit better, a little bit deeper, a little bit more richly, if you will. I can do that at times, and then guess what? There's times when I completely screw it up. And I just show up and I go into sense consciousness and I freak out. Until I catch my breath, until I calm down, until the moment passes, and then I sit down, I get calm, and I remember I have a choice here. I have a choice. I can approach this situation from sense consciousness. I could show up as Peter showed up. I don't know if I would call it Satan. Right? But I think that I would look at it and just go, oh, I get it. I'm letting my ego run everything and tell me all the stuff that isn't true that's going on. Or I can really step into this and understand, look, I may not understand everything that's going on in this moment, but something really cool is probably going to happen as a result of it, and then process it. Now, sometimes I'm better at doing that than other times, right? That's just being real. And that's what we are here. We're real about what's going on in our lives and what's showing up. But to know that we've got the option, that we can have a choice, is pretty powerful, pretty amazing. So the thing is, just understand that this thing called acceptance is a process. And you can practice it. You actually can practice it. And it's one of the tools that we have in our spiritual tool belt that we can use as we're dealing with stuff in our lives that show up where it's not easy. Because let's just get real, sometimes life isn't easy. Sometimes it's not. However, when you have these different tools that we talk about here, that Unity talks about, that the Fillmores talked about, that Jesus talked about, others have talked about, it can make things just go a lot easier, I would say, smoother. Doesn't mean that the bumps are going to disappear. Doesn't mean that stuff's not going to show up at your life that's not a lot of fun to deal with. It just means that you're going to have a way of processing to let you get through it so you don't stay stuck. How many people have ever had something in their life where they just felt like they were stuck? It's the worst. I understand that. I've had several moments in my life where I just felt like I was stuck and there was nothing I could do about that. It's not fun. And yet we all face it. But when we have tools in our tool belt, which lets us realize, okay, wait, this thing showed up, and I've got a choice here. I can actually handle this thing a couple of different ways. I'm not going to deny the reality of what's going on inside of me emotionally. I'm going to process that, and then once I process it, then I'm going to step in and look at the different things that I can show up or how I can show up in this moment, understanding there may be a different way of looking at this. There may be a different way. I think that we would all agree that Jesus showed us a different way. I think he did. Pretty amazing. And that's why I love studying his life and the lives of other masters, because they just looked at things a lot differently than most of us normally look at them. And they all said the same thing. You've got the ability to be able to do this. It's all within you, the same thing that was in me. Jesus' words, this and far greater things you'll do. Why did he say that? He knew. He knew that we all had that piece of the divine within us, and he knew that we all had access to us, and he knew all we had to do is to acknowledge it and then make that a really important part of our lives. And when we focus on our own spiritual growth and make that a top priority, it's amazing how we'll change. It's amazing how we'll transform. It's amazing how that stuff will start to manifest and we're able to grow and really have a deep experience, not only with this thing called God, if you will, but we can also have, finally, we can step into our own power, and then we can look at us very lovingly, very compassionately, and we can say, I am enough. Just think about that for a minute. How beautiful is that to be able to really genuinely look at yourself and just go, I am enough. I am enough. And feel that. And know, as you sit, right where you're sitting, right here, right now, that you're enough. That, I think, is beautiful. I think it's a really beautiful, beautiful lesson that we can learn. I wanted to share with you something else, and this is from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work. Anybody know her? She talks about death and dying and the different steps we go through. Well, when you really look at it, she also created how to let go of relationships, how to let go of a lot of things. And when I looked at it, I thought it was pretty cool and interesting. If you look at it from the standpoint of letting go, or what if we called it the 5 steps of acceptance? So what's the first thing she said that most people do? Denial. This isn't happening. We go through denial, right? And by the way, she studied hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that were actually in the process of dying, is where she came up with this. So there's denial. Then we go and we become angry. And the truth is, actually, anger is very, very, very good. Because anger is actually a way that lets you know that you're moving forward. Anger is actually a way that actually lets you know that you're no longer stuck. You're actually moving in some cases. And I know you've got to be sitting there going, wait a minute, Mike, you can actually get angry? And it's like, oh, you betcha. My process and my experience has taught me that sometimes anger is the first step after apathy. It actually tells you that you're finally caring, because if you weren't angry, you wouldn't care, which is that's where it gets really scary. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. But then we step into anger, so anger can be a very, very healing moment, right? Bargaining. We bargain. Well, if I just do that, hey, God, hey, Jesus, we're going to have a talk with God, and God's going to make this all right. We start to bargain, right? So we start to bargain. Then we start to go through depression. And in my opinion, that's when the emotional stuff starts to kick in. That's when we need to be real with what's going on. Not denying it, just processing it. Allow yourself the process. Grief. I would also call it. Going through grief is very, very, very healing. If there needs to be grief work done, do your grief work. Do it, right? And then finally, acceptance. That's where we just sit back and go, yep, this is what it is. So some final thoughts. If you're really struggling in an area of your life, see if you're accepting it or not. I think we've gone through some pretty decent descriptions of what it looks like if you're accepting it or not. Just see, be real with yourself, be honest. Don't go into denial. Am I accepting this or not? And even if you're not accepting it, is that okay? For a minute. But eventually you're going to go, do I want to stay stuck or do I want to move forward? And then ultimately that's going to be your choice, right? Realize that you do have a choice on how to approach it. You can stand in Christ consciousness. You can stand in that moment and not be in denial, not be in fear, and be in totally acceptance if you want to. You really, really can. Or not. And understand that acceptance is a process that is sometimes easy and sometimes hard. Right? So affirmations help. So why don't we do this one together if you can see it? Together we say, I release all resistance and experience acceptance. Yeah. So in closing, I hope this has been helpful. I understand Calvin's question, like, well, when something shows up, do I fight, or do I accept? I say, go to consciousness first. In my opinion, if we go there, you'll be given the answers on, do I try to fight this thing that's showing up in my life, or do I accept it? Because I do believe when there's times when you can fight it. And I don't mean necessarily fight it like as in this, but like, hey, this is going in my life. I think I want to change it. I think I want to work on my consciousness and then change this aspect of my life. I think that's totally normal, and that's our, if you will, our God-given right, because we're given the ability to be conscious, and by being conscious, then what we can do is start changing our thoughts, as the Fillmores and others have taught us, and by changing our thoughts, then the outer world can start to change. It starts inside. We can make that decision if we want to, or not. Or not. But either way, you're standing in your power. Either way, you're standing in your divinity. Either way, you're doing exactly what Charles and Myrtle did and what they talked about. This idea of, I've got a choice in this moment here and now. I can decide on how I want to handle this. And then go from there. You guys are amazing. You guys are divine, each and every one of you. Don't let anybody ever tell you you're less than that, ever. You're a beautiful creation. You're loved, you matter, you're important, and you're needed now more than ever with everything that's going on. My challenge to you is to be the light that you are. Accept the light that you are. That doesn't mean anything special. It just means show up. Be present. Take this thing that's going on inside of here and go, wow, I can actually start to connect with this thing and make a difference? You betcha. You betcha. Thanks again. God bless.